You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, inventors, creators, and leaders in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel, a publicist and marketer in the cannabis industry. Thinking about regulations is the least sexy part of the cannabis industry, says CEO Marion Mariathasen of Simplifya, but it's necessary for cannabis businesses to use compliance tools to stay one step ahead of regulators. We discuss the repercussions and how easy and cost-effective it is with tools like Simplifya. We talk about their challenges, partnerships, and the work they're doing with regulators and banks in preparation for national legalization. Let's meet Marion.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Great. Yeah, no, I'm actually really excited to talk to you about, regulations in the cannabis industry. And it's just something I never really talk about. So I really want to learn today and understand it. So it's
we joke it's the least sexiest thing in the industry, but it's a necessity.
But yeah, so I guess if we'll just start out with, if you could just give everyone an overview of Simplifya, who it serves, the problems you're solving in the cannabis industry, and then we can dive into the questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, first off, thanks for having me on the show, Pam. Glad to be here. My name is Marion. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Simplifya. Simplifya has been now operating since 2016. We're the leading regulatory and operational compliance company. And so what does that mean? Our primary client that we started serving were the licensed operators. So early on, we understood that this is going to be a fast-moving industry that's going to require, being heavily regulated. We needed to find an efficient, cost-effective way to help operators stay compliant, right, to all the moving regulations. And we always say at Simplifya the most valuable asset a licensed operator has is their license to operate. And so maintaining that license and preserving that license is a key element, I think, to their well-being and success. So Simplifya started off, as I said earlier, with serving the licensed operators. And we have a core product, what we call Core, which is a self-audit tool that has SOP built into it, as well as what we call a smart cabinet. So it's a kind of a three-pronged approach in this one product. But the essence of what the Core product does is, if you're a licensed operator, call it here in Denver, Colorado, and you're a dispensary, and you have a medical and recreational license, you go into Simplifya, you put in your license information, and it auto-generates a checklist broken down by category. So from accounting, books and records, all the way down to waste management. Then you walk through your facility, you have a tablet app, a mobile app, and a web app. You walk through your facility, do the audit. So Simplifya's name comes from the fact that literally we aim to simplify the regulations down to a 12th grade reading level, and we convert them into a yes or no question. So you walk through your facility, answer these yes or no questions. At the end of that audit, it spits out a report that says, here's where you're compliant, here's where you're not compliant. And for those areas of non-compliance, we give them remediation items to how to fix those areas of non-compliance with the governing body that published that regulation, including the citation number. The entire gamut is there so that they can reference and understand what's going on. And then, as I mentioned, we're a reg tech company, so half of our team are lawyers and policy folks, and the other half are engineers. So they will take regulations, extrapolate from the regulations, and create standard operating procedures based on your license type and the state that you're in. So it's all provided for the operator. And so that's another key component to what the product brings. And then the smart cabinet is essentially a cheat sheet that tells you all the different moving parts and applications that you have to stay on top of when you have to renew it. We also have a license tracker module built into that tells you, from fire extinguishers to your licenses, tracks just about anything and everything that you need to stay on top of. So the core focus of this product is to streamline license operators, all these moving parts, and to make it very easy and manageable. So our clients range from Cureleaf, the big MSOs, all the way down to small mom and pop operators. So whether you have a large compliance team or no compliance team, Simplifya's tool helps you stay on top of all those, ever-changing tasks, really.
Right. I was thinking it must be very helpful in the beginning stages of the application process. I'm sure you
Yes.
have to be very detailed in all those
Yes.
regulations and how you're going to be handling them. And is that where you start working with a lot of people that
Yeah,
they?
so that's a great question, Pam. So we do have a lot of folks that write Simplify into their application process to actually help them win the licenses, right? Because I think oftentimes folks want to know, the people that are reviewing the application, what are you going to do for operational compliance? And so when Simplify has not been around long enough, I think most of the people that review these applications know about Simplify, so license, or people that are looking to win a license, actually do build this into that application process. And one thing to note here is that, so I think the term compliance is very loosely used in the industry, because everyone says compliance, compliance, and so you have POS compliance, you have seed to sale compliance, and then you have operational compliance, which is what we do. And seed to sale and POS are just small subsets of the broader picture of compliance. And so we ingest everything from A to Z, versus people are like, oh, I only have a POS system. Great, that covers only your POS portion of your compliance area, versus what we do and we provide.
Right, that's a big distinction of,
Yes.
yeah, those three. I'm sure it's important in their application process, because that's one of the biggest things that can take a company down, is not being compliant with,
Absolutely.
fines and all that. I mean, one of the biggest things that could really take a company
Yes.
down. And I find that there are so many new entrepreneurs in this space who don't have the experience, but to come into a business like this, industry like this, is just insanity
Yeah.
of what you have to deal with as a first-time entrepreneur.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's so many of us, or so many of them in this industry. So
Yeah, and it's quite daunting, and every state is very different in the way they regulate it, and it's just, there's a lot going on. So whether you have an extremely smart legal team or not, that's the problem. It's a lot to digest and stay on top of, and especially if you're a multi-state operator where you're trying to cover a bunch of different locations, right? So
right.
yeah,
It's easy to see the
yeah,
benefits, right, of
yeah.
Simplify for sure. So what are some of the, I mean, you may have really kind of just said them, but what are some of the biggest challenges that your company faces in providing these regulatory solutions? I guess, like
Yes.
this, set the state to state, but is there some other things that you just kind of can?
Yeah. So, we're now in 29 states or 30 states, one of the two. Sorry, forgive me, but I think 29 or 30 states. And I think our challenge, over the last 6 years, we've really kind of, honed in on our operations and how we, effectively do what we do. But I think, from our standpoint, it's really helping people understand why compliance, especially operational compliance, is important. I think oftentimes it's kind of a secondary thought for many folks, unless you're a little bit more coming from, what do I call it, like the Wall Street type, right? That are much more of a risk averse type of folks that are coming into the industry. I think they certainly see the value of it, but I think for the smaller operators, I think because they're running 100 miles a minute, they don't think about it as much as they should. And so I think in California, we saw recently, there was a fine for an operator of $1.24 million, right? Because they had broken some rules. And it literally can just sink your business, just not only from a cost perspective, but if you lose your license, there goes your entire business, right? And so I think our challenge has been just trying to educate folks to understand, yes, it takes time and some money to ensure that you're compliant from an operational perspective. But if you do that really well, you not only have a more protected business, but when you go to sell your business, a lot of the more sophisticated acquirers are looking to see what sort of governance and compliance efforts have you put in historically, because no one wants to buy that risk either, right? And so it's an education process. And I think that's probably the more challenging side of what we do. Because again, the joke is it's the least sexiest part of the industry, but it's a necessity.
Right, right. Yeah, that's the perfect tagline. But yeah, that was going to be my next question is how are you convincing this, because there are so many small businesses,
Yeah.
how to spend this kind of money and show the benefits. So yeah, I was wondering, I'm sure that's one of your biggest challenges because small businesses have small budgets and
Yes.
they're all trying to do everything themselves and things like that.
Well, Simplify, we've tried to price this in a very price conscious way, right? So we are a SaaS model, and so it's priced at $335 a month per location or facility. So again, it's still way more cost effective than, and not to say like I think law firms certainly bring a lot of value, but it's meant to help you minimize your overhead and ensure compliance, right? So we think it's priced pretty well there at that price
Right.
point.
Well, when you consider lawyers are at the very least $500 an hour, right? Or
Right,
something.
right.
That
Yeah,
if you hired someone
that's right.
for even 1 hour a month,
Right.
I don't think they can get that work done.
Right,
So I
right.
guess that's right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I wonder how your company ensures data security and privacy for your customers.
Yeah.
And you also considered technologies like blockchain.
So, everything of Simplify is hosted in the cloud. There's nothing local, so there's no issue there with data breaches or integrity from a local server perspective. Everything is, multi-encrypted. All the latest technologies in terms of, safeguarding information from even your audit information to your personal business information is all encrypted and stored in the cloud. Even for Simplify, we actually have zero access from any sort of back-end perspective into our client data, and that was designed literally, as a point that we were focusing on because we didn't know early on, whether any sort of federal or state authorities would come to us and say, hey, we want to dig into your client's information, and is there, are we going to have relevant information based on compliance and non-compliance that could get our clients in trouble? So we didn't even, typically software companies that usually have some sort of a backdoor into data and whatnot. So we did not do that for that very reason. So yeah, we're constantly evolving the technology for the latest and greatest, but everything's hosted on Amazon Cloud, and it's a big entity that does their own security protocols. We certainly go through security testing and go through all sorts of audits ourselves to ensure that all data is, stored securely.
And I would imagine that the data security issue and privacy issue probably will be more important when we start working with banks more,
Yeah,
right? Because of the money laundering and
for
what's
sure.
the KYC, your custom,
Yes.
all those things
Yeah.
that they'll require from us. That's why I
Yeah.
was thinking, I've actually wrote an article once about blockchain solutions in the industry for
Yeah.
that, thinking about the banking and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. So that's what was bringing that to mind.
Yeah.
So as far as the banks, are you doing anything differently, when the time comes that we can
Yeah.
all work with banks or?
Yeah. So let me give a little background that. So we've been now closely working with a few kind of leading banks, if you will, trying to understand their needs, where the gaps are between their kind of know your customer, how they're monitoring financial flow in and out of the bank. And so right now, Simplify, over time, Pam, we've started building products not only for banks, but insurance companies, for law firms, consultants. So we've got a range of products for different types of people that even serve the licensed operator, right? And so from a banking perspective, we have what's called Simplify Lite that's now being piloted with a few banks. And what that does is that audit report I was talking about that comes from the core product, instead of all of that information going to the bank, they're much more concerned about parts of questions that pertain to Cole memo, the Cole memo random that essentially bank regulators are looking for around what banks need to abide by, and FinCEN guidance. These are certain areas of what bank regulators want to ensure that when you're banking a cannabis business are adhering to, right? And so that's a different area that now Simplifya is getting into, to where operators use Simplifya's audit tool. And when they send an audit report to the bank can say, okay, look, you're abiding by these kind of key areas that we're concerned about and that our regulators are concerned about. So that's one way we're starting to work more closely with banks. But then we have another product called Simplifya Market Guide that's used by 50 plus banks right now. It's kind of a high level snapshot of all the key areas that banks who are serving the cannabis industry are concerned about. So from taxation to lending rules to, I mean, just covers a whole lot of different areas. And so that was an entree for us to get a product to bankers that they can use for the industry. And now we've got another product coming in. And so it's.
So you're kind of setting the framework and the
Yes.
relationship building with the bank. So when we're ready to roll, you
Correct.
kind of have all
Correct.
that in place. Yeah. Okay. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
And we work very closely with, Shield Compliance, which is a fintech company that's been serving the industry probably just as long as we have. They actually have technology that monitors money, within the bank account that's coming from operators. And so working hand in hand with those types of tech companies, I think, becomes a one-stop good solution for the banker, because again, highly regulated. So that, which is why a lot of banks, still don't play in this space. But now we're trying to give them a little bit more of a comfort level of saying, hey, we've got you covered if you want to play in this space. Yeah.
Right. What kind of partnerships is Simplifya? I mean, you're already kind of naming a few, but what kind of partnerships are you forming in the industry to become stronger and more?
Yeah. So, as we've been, playing in the space for quite some time, one of the elements that we've always thought that's important in terms of foundation in any industry, one is obviously compliance. That's what we're talking about here. But the other part is the banking side. The other side is the insurance side. And then, I call it the fourth leg of the stool. And I think that's accounting and taxation, right? If you have these kind of four elements down really well, you set a good foundation for a business to continue to grow without any real risk involved. And so we just about 3 weeks ago, Pam, we launched what's called Risk Mitigation Alliance, RMA for short. And that is in partnership with, the leading insurance carriers and brokers that have been serving the cannabis industry for quite some time now. And what that's kind of designed to do is essentially insurance carriers have said, look, if you use Simplifya, the level of risk is lowered because it is an operational compliance tool. So therefore, if your business from an operational perspective is compliant, they can derive or make a good assumption that you're buttoned up in other areas of your business, and therefore your risk profile of your business is lower. And therefore, Risk Mitigation Alliance, two key elements to that, and that is, if you use Simplifya, these leading insurance companies will pay for 70% of Simplifya's software, which is pretty big deal, right? Because essentially it's saying it's a way to encourage operators to be compliant. And if they're doing that, then the insurance world, as well as rest of the industry, actually gets to benefit by saying, look, everyone's playing by the rules. For all those people that don't want cannabis to be legal or that are opposing it, it's a great way to say we're all compliant, we're doing everything by the rules, and therefore this industry should continue to thrive, right? And so first piece again is 70% Simplifya will be paid for by insurance. The second aspect of it, which is also a really key element, is that
That's
if you
huge.
use it is.
I think that's a big selling point.
I think so as well, because essentially that 335 that we were talking about goes down to $100 a month per location. So 235 of those dollars are paid for by these insurance companies, and it's a great incentive, and that's exactly what they're looking for, right? To lower the risk of every operator. And then the second aspect of it is if you're using Simplifya, when your policy comes up for renewal, they will actually look to give you preferred pricing or even discounts on your premiums, again, based on the risk profile of every operator. So there's no certain like, oh, you get 5% off or 10% off. It's not a guaranteed one either, but it just really comes down to the risk profile. And again, what they're looking for is like, how buttoned up are you as an operator? And if you're really well buttoned up, then chance of getting some sort of preferred pricing is quite good. So
Right.
that's yeah, and so that's the latest one. And as I said, Shield Compliance, being a fintech company, we're working very closely with them and their banking partners. Cohn Resnick, one of the big, I think, 10 accounting firms. We work very closely with them in terms of how can we bring them into the fold around this risk mitigation component, right? Because again, tax, accounting, these are all areas of the business that should be extremely looked at. And then we have partners like New Frontier Data that they're always publishing all sorts of data, and so we're always curious as to what's happening as well. And we also have lots of conversations with regulators and government across the country, trying to help them tell them, here's our kind of expertise, here's what operators need, and here's how we think we can be helpful to you. And so like state of New York, we've had multiple conversations with them because they want to do it better and better than everyone else, as every state does.
Not yet.
yeah, exactly. But so I think at least the government folks wanting to understand how they can roll out this program and help it, make it more beneficial for the operators and everyone involved, and talking to us, I think is a great first step.
Right. I was going to ask how involved you were in advocating for the industry, and we all know how important it is right now for our lawmakers to understand the industry in general, and like you said before, to be assured that we're trying to do this in a legal,
in a compliant manner. Yeah. So we work very closely with NCIA, and those folks have been around for a long time. I mean, I think they've done a great job trying to, pound the pavement, saying, hey, look, this is a real industry. We've got a lot of jobs. We've got a lot of tax revenue that's being generated, and, let's get this moving. And, so we've got, having been around now for 6 years, Pam, I think that certainly helps us because, we are recognized, and I think people trust us. And so we try and advance the industry everywhere we can, while serving the industry and all those people that serve the licensed operators, right? So,
right. Education. That's just all what it's about right now if we're going to get this going.
Yes, it is.
Maybe close it out with, not like, is the Banking Act going to pass, but do you see any changes, like in your crystal ball kind of, or what's coming up on the horizon or just anything else, that you're seeing in that world?
Yeah, so I think the safe banking bill, I think this is the 9th time it's trying to get pushed through, and fortunately there is some bipartisan support for it. I don't, again, it's hard to say because it is the 9th time. Obviously I'm extremely optimistic, as I'm every time, but it's hard to say. But in terms of the crystal ball, I think this has certainly turned out to be a long game, right? I think the green rush where everyone was jumping in and money was just flying all over the place. I myself am an investor in the space. I've got about 18, 19 investments, and I think we've come to realize like this is going to be a way longer game. So it's really time to kind of hunker down and ensure that we're doing everything as an industry the right way, to support one another and the industry, and that's the only way to get through it. And I think we will eventually have a lot of, I think, great activity that will happen for this industry, whether it's on the federal level, safe banking, 280E, all these things that we need. It will eventually happen, but until then, we just need to get through. And I, unfortunately, from COVID and even now because of the markets, we've lost, I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies that just couldn't weather the storm. But I think the industry is not going away, and so we just need to, I think, be very supportive of one another and get there. So,
right, that's the key. We have to, I feel like we really have to lift everyone up and help each other, because everyone who's in the industry is so passionate about it, more than I know you hear that all the time, but it's really true.
Yes.
And there's so
Yeah.
many people struggling. And if we can just kind
Yeah.
of put a hand out and bring that other person up, we're going to bring us all up. And it really is true.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I hope that that happens.
And as a closing thought, Pam, if you don't mind, I'll share
Yes,
this. And I
please.
think, and I alluded to this earlier, I think, it's really important for obviously the industry to support one another, but I think this is where the compliance piece comes in, because there are still, I think, what is it, 78 or 82%? I can't even remember the number of Americans now that want cannabis legalized, and yet it's still not, right? And I think because there are still folks that look at this industry as like the bad people or like the bad industry, and I think that's where compliance again can help. It's all about education, one, but
And
two,
trust.
yes, and trust, but and showing folks that are not on board with cannabis that look, everything that government and governing authorities have put into place, we as an industry, we're following it, right? We're not the bad people. We're not trying to cut corners. We are trying to do everything the right way to help progress this movement. And I think that's really important as well. And again, as I said earlier, compliance is like the least uh, thought about area, but that is another way that we will continue to make this industry or push it ahead. Otherwise, more we see in the news bad actors or people getting caught for doing whatever the case may be, it just doesn't help us. So,
Oh yeah, somebody getting fined for $1 million because
yeah,
of their bad
right,
behavior. Yeah, we don't need
yeah,
to hear that. Right,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. You're
and
absolutely right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about risk mitigation for our industry, I think, overall. And you mitigate risk and can get consumer confidence that everything is done by the book, and there's going to be at some point no reason for people in Capitol Hill to say like, look, we just can't avoid this anymore.
Yeah, and we mostly need government,
Yes,
government approval, government
yes,
trust at this point. That is the biggest thing that we need, and
yes,
that's what Simplifya provides.
yeah, I
So
think so. Yeah, thank you.
we'll end it with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you.
Likewise, Pat. Thank you. I really
Okay.
enjoyed it.